Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the, the last breakout session slot on the last day of TC17. Thank you for placing your final bet on us. Welcome to, there's an app for that, Create Your Own with Mobile App Bootstrap. I'm Ron Thies. I'm a software engineer at Tableau, working out of the Seattle headquarters office. I wrote a big chunk of the code we're going to talk about today. I really like this project, and despite my stage fright-induced monotone speaking voice, I'm actually excited to talk with you about this today.
Hello, I'm Lee Gray. I'm a sales consultant with Tableau. I'm based in North Carolina, and I'm part of the sales team that supports a good part of the enterprise organizations in the Southeast. And I'm really thrilled to be here talking to you about this. And I really hope that my goal as the result of this is that you go home and feel enabled to create your own mobile apps, whether you do it yourself or someone does it for you, but you'll have the knowledge to at least feel confident you can do that.
So this is a developer track, and it's kind of in the embedded analytics section of our developer offerings. We will be embedding Tableau vizzes inside of mobile apps. The agenda we've got for you today, we'll do a quick overview of what the mobile app Bootstrap is, and also a little about what it isn't. We've got a demo of a custom app that Lee has put together using the Bootstrap. We'll dive deeper into how a mobile app connects to Tableau server, and we'll go into some of the common customizations that folks might want to make to their own app. We should have time at the end for questions, so please hold them until then. But our goal really is to make you feel like this is something accessible and something that's achievable if it's of interest. So we wanted to give a quick overview of the Bootstrap. We wanted to talk about what it is, but also what it isn't. It is not Tableau Mobile. Tableau Mobile is an app available on the iOS and Android app stores. It's available today. It's free. It lets you sign into your server, browse your vizzes, interact with them, take them where you want. It even lets you grab snapshots that can be viewed offline. Similarly, if Tableau Mobile is fine, but you just want to restrict the sign-in screen, normally a user could type in any server they want. They've got a big fat button for Tableau Online there. If you want to get rid of that and put your own servers on that list, or make it so the users can't even type a server name field, you can do that today with the publicly available Tableau Mobile and a mobile device management system. So that's a little about Tableau Mobile. The mobile app Bootstrap is something separate. It's a set of open source sample code. It provides some examples in a couple of different frameworks. It's got some samples demonstrating specific techniques, and it's basically code that is free for you to use or copy or just be inspired by.
Let me ask you something, Ron, about the term bootstrap, because that confuses a lot of people, I think. And they think, well, that's kind of a boring term. I'm not even sure what that means. And I know a lot of people I'm around, they want to call it an SDK. But I don't really think of it as an SDK. What do you think?
Yeah, we went back and forth on the name. It isn't an SDK in that it's not introducing new functionality. It's providing examples of existing functionality to kind of help you bootstrap your own work. But yes, I agree, the name is pretty boring. It's available today. It's at github.com/Tableau with the other developer tools from Tableau. It does leverage the JavaScript API where needed. And at the end, you own and maintain your own app. It's yours to do with as you please. So why did we go down this road? We were approached by a number of customers who had custom mobile use cases. So they were running warehouses or grocery stores, and they wanted to enable folks with Tableau vizzes as they're walking around. Hospitals love to put barcodes on things and people, and they wanted to be able to scan a barcode and take a look at a viz related to that barcode at any time. Field salespeople, these are sales folks running around in a field. Lee, this is what I imagine field salespeople do. They run around on a soccer field all day.
Well, you're not totally wrong, but we call that field a golf course. So
Right. Everyone wants their own custom branding, so their own app icon, their own name, their own color scheme inside their app. They want an integrated experience, especially for folks who already have a mobile app that they're distributing to their users internally. They want those vizzes to feel integrated in with their existing app. Some folks really want to provide broad access within their organization. So every employee at every retail store, they want to provide that access, but those folks don't need the full power of Tableau Server and access to all the vizzes. They only need access to a couple of vizzes. In a similar but related mode, they want an executive mode where they can provide certain key executives with the exact vizzes that they need to look at. In all cases, the common theme is a streamlined user interface. They want that to feel very easy. So there are kind of two main audiences. The first one, they're starting from scratch. So they don't have an existing mobile app. They're open to any solution that works. And they generally have a lower amount of mobile-specific knowledge. The second audience already has an existing custom app that they've distributed to their own users. They've already got existing framework requirements. Often there's an app person or small team that works on it, and they generally have higher mobile-specific knowledge. So what's available today? Our customers tend to focus on iOS. That's what we focused on for the Bootstrap. But as Lee will show, his work was all done on Android, so it is possible to get it running on Android too. There are two main frameworks. The first is called Cordova. It mainly uses HTML and CSS and JavaScript to create a custom mobile app. And the second framework uses Objective-C, so that works natively on iOS. Cordova tends to be more appealing to that first audience that doesn't have an app, and the native Objective-C version is very natural for a company that already has an iOS app. It includes some sample apps showing example ways you can configure things, and it even includes a barcode scanner to show that technique if that's interesting. Out of the box, it looks like this. Here's the Cordova version. You can see it's got a kind of a home page. There are 4 buttons at the bottom, so kind of a landing page, and then 3 vizzes, which are prescribed ahead of time by the app, and those are the 3 that the user will have access to. The native Objective-C version looks almost identical, similar setup with kind of a home tab and then some buttons on the bottom. And then the sample barcode scanner just has 2 buttons at the bottom, one for scanning a barcode and one for viewing a viz based on that barcode scan. So now we'll see a demo of a custom app that Lee put together with no help from engineering. And Lee, you did this without much of a programming background, is that right?
that's right. Yeah, I started my career as a programmer on mainframes, something. I don't know if anybody heard of those before, but there's something called COBOL. I did all that kind of stuff. But I heard some of you say he doesn't look that old. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so that's what I started my career and did it for a little while. Done a little bit of C# programming, but I definitely don't do this on a regular basis. I know a little JavaScript to get me by, but I'm a Google programmer.
You work for Google?
No, what I mean by that is whenever I need to find any code or I need to figure out how to do something, I go into Google, do a search. I can usually find a little snippet of code. I cut that and paste it into my program, and that's my programming.
I know many Google programmers.
So let me walk you through this app that I created. So the idea behind it is, since I'm in the sales force, we need to have something that we could leverage for our salespeople to be able to show the capabilities of the mobile Bootstrap. So I created this using our old friend, the Superstore data set. And the idea was that you might have a scenario where you had salespeople that are out in the field and they were on the golf course maybe, and they wanted to have a mobile app that captured their reports and had an integrated application. So that's what we have. So let me just show you that. So as we said, we've got the 4 tabs across the top there, and each one of the 3 tabs on the right will take us to a specific viz, so it's a quick shortcut to be able to get to a specific viz. Have some filtering capabilities here, so I'm selecting consumer and east, and I added some additional functionality to this, so you can see you've got little icons there. These are salespeople, so they don't necessarily remember what filters they selected, so we can see that they selected consumer and the little icon on the east there. And this is also using a global filtering capability outside, because these are separate workbooks, so we can filter within the mobile app leveraging the JavaScript API. So as we go to different tabs, we're still filtering on the same things, consumer and east here. And then I also built in a reset button so we can get rid of those filters real easily. And then I also wanted to be able to add an ability to share. Now, if you saw the devs on stage on Monday, with 10.5, we've got the ability to do that as part of the mobile app, but I didn't have that available to me at the time, so I built it myself, sort of. And so this shows that capability, and it's leveraging the native share capability of the mobile platform. And so in this case, we're selecting Gmail, and I downloaded the image for the particular viz that I was looking at. And depending on the mobile client, it either embeds it so you can see it, or it just attaches it. And then we can email it off to someone. So it's a nice way of showing how we can do sharing within the app itself. Then back on the home page here, normally by default, the Bootstrap, these 6 icons, they just go to a website. So instead, for one of them, I wanted to have another viz. So this is a supplier listing. Someone's out in the field and they want to see a list of their suppliers. They can easily get to that on another icon. And then if you've ever seen the, we call a carousel, where you flip through images. So this is using the REST API to query Tableau Server, get a list of the icons that the user has access to, and just allow you to scroll through it. And then you click on one particular one, and it'll take you to the mobile-enabled viz view of it itself, so we can see it that way. And then the third thing that I did here on this homepage was I used another location awareness capability. So I'm taking advantage, the phone knows where we are. We can filter that, the viz based on that. So since I'm in North Carolina, we're actually filtering the viz based on the geographic location of the device.
Were those, the geolocation and the carousel, were those difficult to integrate into the Bootstrap?
Well, I did it, so it couldn't be that awful hard. But seriously, these mobile frameworks, they come with plugins. And so like the geographic location and the carousel, I was able to find plugins that did that for me. I didn't have to code them. I just had to learn how to kind of incorporate them into the framework. So it was relatively straightforward, actually.
Cool. So next, we'll dive a little deeper into how a mobile app connects to Tableau Server. This does get a little more complicated. We'll walk through this sequence diagram here. And there are a couple of core concepts. The first one is that we're going to do authentication with Tableau Server. We're not getting around the Tableau Server authentication or security protocols. It goes hand in hand with those. And we'll use a web view in the app to perform that authentication. A web view is like a mini widget that understands how to show a web page and how to run JavaScript. So we'll let Tableau Server present whatever it needs to present, a username password form or redirect to a SAML identity provider. It kind of handles that. Once the user is authenticated, we'll get a session ID sent back, and that appears as a cookie, but that session ID authenticates us with Tableau Server later on. Once we've got that, we can open up a web view and display the viz in a web view. This is another core concept. The upside of an app using a web view to display a viz is that Tableau Server does all the hard work of figuring out what HTML and CSS to use and what JavaScript to run. When you upgrade Tableau Server, all of those benefits come along. You don't have to change your app in order to deal with a new Tableau Server version. So it works pretty well. These cookies are the same cookies that would be delivered when you use Tableau with a desktop web browser. By default, that session times out in 4 hours. If the user's been idle for 4 hours after signing in, the next time they go to use a viz, they'll have to sign in again. You can configure this in your server YAML file by setting the session idle limit. This does affect all user sessions. So if someone comes in with a desktop browser, if you've changed it from 4 hours to 40 days, then anyone on a desktop browser will see that same limit. You can also set a lifetime limit flag that defaults to a day. So regardless of how idle the user has been, their session is going to time out in a day. This is kind of stinky on mobile. A 4-hour idle timeout means if you sign in and then you go to bed and you wake up and you look at your device, you have to sign in again. And it can be a little painful. So on mobile especially, we use a technology we call it connected clients. It's really a version of OAuth, if you're familiar with that protocol. And we start with a session ID that we got before, and using that session ID, we can get a couple of tokens, a long-lasting refresh token and a short-lived access token. The app stores those tokens for later use, so if the user reboots their phone, when they bring the app up, the app has those tokens stored off, and the user can pick up where they left off. The web view, when looking at a viz, uses the short-lived access tokens to authenticate. Those will eventually expire. When they do, we can use our long-lived refresh token to get new short-lived access tokens. We then store off that access token again so we can use it later. This connected clients approach, we do have a library that works in Objective-C for use on iOS. It's not that complex, but we do provide a library to hopefully make it a little easier.
And earlier on, you kind of alluded to some differences between the iOS and the Objective-C version of the Bootstrap. Isn't this one example of where it's different?
Yeah, the iOS versus Android, there is, our customers have asked for iOS versions. We haven't seen really much demand for an Android version, so we haven't converted it. It is open source. Feel free to create your own. It isn't too bad. But you're right, that is one of the differences, yeah. These refresh tokens have similar parameters. So in your server YAML file, you can configure this if you want. The default is an idle timeout of 14 days. So that long-lived token means the user can be idle for up to 2 weeks, and they'll still remain signed in. Likewise, you can assign a lifetime expiration that defaults to 1 year. So regardless of how idle or active a user has been, their session will time out in a year. If you want to turn off these timeouts and make it so the user never has to sign in again, you can do that too. The server admin can enable connected clients on the server through the Tableau Server web interface. And both the admin and individual users can invalidate these connected clients tokens. So if a user loses their phone, they can go into Tableau Server, remove those tokens, and if that device tries to sign in again, they will have to retype in their credentials. So now we'll take a look at some common ways that folks want to customize their mobile apps. And so Lee, we're going to see some of this is your development environment, right?
This is my development environment, yes. So in the upper left-hand corner, you see Visual Studio Code, not to be confused with Visual Studio, but they're both from Microsoft. This is free, and it's a lightweight, kind of intended for web kind of development, and has some nice debugging capabilities. So I use that. And then on the right is the Android emulator. So I was developing this for Android, but I could also deploy it on iOS. And then I've got a command line here that I can run the command to basically build the app and deploy it onto the emulator. So what I like about this environment is that there are plugins for the Visual Studio and for Cordova, so I can actually debug as I look at things in the emulator, so I can make sure that things are working properly as I'm actually seeing them in the emulator. So let's kind of walk through this process. So what I'm going to do first is build the app and deploy it on the emulator. And it'll open up there, and then I'll be able to make some changes. So one of the first things I'm going to want to change if I'm starting out from scratch with the Bootstrap is I want to brand it. That's usually the first thing that someone wants to do, right? They want to change the title, change the icons, and things like that. So I'm going to do that initially. So I'm just going to grab, you'll see there's an image, for those of, for those who can't see, there's an image folder as part of the project, and I'm just going to drag in a new image there from my Superstore, and then there's an index.html file, just like you'd have a website, and this is using HTML here with a image tag, and I'm just changing it like I would if I was editing an HTML page. So I'm pointing to the source for the image, and then I can change attributes like the width and the height and the alignment to make sure that the icon's going to be where I want. So I'm changing what you see now is the gear, and I'm going to change that to the Superstore logo, and now you can see it just by saving it, it automatically puts it in there in the emulator so I can see it in real time. And now I want to add a Superstore mobile title to the app, which will appear at the top middle of the screen. And again, just by saving it, I'll be able to see it instantly in the emulator. So that's how I can do a quick branding with just a couple changes. Now, Ron, we talked about a little of the differences between the Cordova and the native version. What are some of the trade-offs between these two versions?
Yeah, they're pretty distinct. The Cordova version really puts the entire app inside of one huge web view. So everything in your user interface lives inside of a web view, for better or for worse. So there are buttons at the bottom. They look like native iOS buttons. They are not. They are composed with HTML and CSS. When the user taps one of those buttons, some JavaScript receives the action. And that contrasts with the native approach, where it really is a full-on Objective-C app. Those buttons at the bottom, in iOS land, we would call that a UI tab bar controller with some UI buttons on it. If you tap one of those buttons, then the native iOS event handling takes control.
And let me point out one thing about those buttons. On the Cordova, you'll notice that the tabs are at the bottom here on the Cordova side. And that's because it's the iOS version in Cordova. And you remember on mine, they were at the top. I didn't do anything to change that. That's Cordova doing that for me because it can deal with both platforms, and it has the best practices built in. So it says, well, if this is for iOS, I'm going to put the tabs at the bottom, and if it's Android, I'm going to put it at the top.
So Lee, how does, the Bootstrap ships with some sort of default vizzes. How do you change the vizzes that are shown on those tabs?
Yeah, so that's real easy to do, and that's really because of the framework has a configuration file. It's a config.js file, and it just has some variables in there that point to some URLs to server, and those are going to be the 3 default vizzes, so I'm just changing those out and pointing them to my own custom vizzes that I want to display, and just grab those URLs from server and paste them in there. And then I want to change the titles. See, I've got viz 1, 2, and 3 right now. That's not very descriptive. So I'm editing the tabs.html file, and that is the code that actually creates those tabs. And I'm just changing the titles. Again, pretty much in HTML. It's using the Ionic framework. That's what actually creates those tabs, but I'm just changing it there to reflect what the vizzes are going to actually be displaying. So again, we'll save that, and you'll see that we've got the titles that are different for each of the 3 tabs, and now when we go to select each one, it'll go to its own respective viz that's customized there.
And those vizzes look pretty good on mobile. Did you use Tableau Desktop's device designer for those?
Right, yeah, so if you're not familiar with, starting with Tableau 10 Desktop, there's a device designer, and that allows me to take a standard dashboard that was designed for a browser and change the layout based on different mobile platforms. So I could have a different layout for an iPhone versus an iPad or a tablet, because obviously the screen real estate is different. You know, if you're looking at something in a browser or an iPad, it's going to be, you know, more horizontally oriented, and in a phone like this, I want things more vertically oriented, and I can take off things, I can change the orientation. It just makes it a lot more friendly for a mobile device. So now we've been talking about some differences here between the mobile platforms. What are some hardware differences in, like, on screen size, and the difference like between the different operating systems?
Yeah, good question. This is something that mobile developers have to deal with. I pulled some stats from Tableau Mobile for the last few months. And we can see on the top are Android operating system versions, and on the bottom are iOS operating system versions over time. The Android stays relatively constant, and we can see that there's still a top layer of folks on an Android OS from years ago. On iOS on the bottom, you can see even a minor dot release gets picked up by users fairly quickly. For the sorts of custom apps that you'd be developing, hopefully you don't care about the operating system version, especially if you're sticking with fairly basic functionality. The core of your engine is in a web view, and with any luck, you won't care. But it is something to keep in mind as you look at custom apps. Hardware version, these are also stats from Tableau Mobile. That upper left rectangle is iPhone. The lower left rectangle is iPad. All of the yellow rectangles on the right are Android hardware permutations that people are connecting with. There are some pretty tiny rectangles at the bottom with Chinese Android OS versions that we don't have access to. And this is a little bit, honestly, this is a little misleading because it's lumping in all of iPhone in one category. And that could be an older iPhone that has a different screen aspect ratio than they do today. Likewise, the iPad, that's everything from one of those smaller iPad minis up to a 12-inch iPad Pro. So it's a little misleading, but we tend to not have huge hardware incompatibilities on iOS. For most of the work on Android, the sorts of things that you'd want to configure, you mostly don't care about. The differences in hardware won't matter, but every once in a while we do get a bug from one of those tiny yellow rectangles in the bottom. And Lee, we kind of have that main home kind of starting tab. How does someone change the content on that?
Yeah, so that's, again, part of the framework is just some HTML code that's specifying that we've got the 6 icons there on the home screen, and you could change that to be whatever you want. That's just the way that it is. And so let's just take a look at that and what we need to do. So there is a tab home.html, and we've got a little block of a div there. That's where that incorporate Tableau content part is. I just want to get rid of that, so we're just going to take that off. And then the rest here is just a block of divs that's creating those 6 icons. So I'm just going to take that out and paste my own in there. And again, if you have any familiarity with HTML, this is just standard stuff here that you could easily create your own layout. So we'll just save it, and there we go. We've got a new home page there. So now you're starting to get a feel. Again, now remember, I haven't really coded anything. All I've done is change some, basically some HTML here, and we've got a branded app, and we have some custom reports that we're calling as a result of that. Now, Ron, you were talking earlier about the stats on the devices and things like that. It would be great as a developer if you could see some of that yourself for your application. What platforms being used, what OS, what devices. Is there anything like that available?
Yeah, absolutely. They're called analytics packages, and they let you track your app usage. All of them, out of the box, give you kind of the basic demographic information. So what device models are people using? What operating system versions do they have? What version of your app are they running? How long is their session length when they use your app? You can also track specific actions taken inside the app if you want. So if someone taps on one of those native buttons and you want to see, all right, how often do they look at Viz 1 versus Viz 2 versus 3, you can see that specific to the app. It's worth checking with your marketing team if they've already got a web analytics package. Often, those firms that make web analytics packages also have mobile analytics packages too. So it's worth seeing if they're happy with theirs. There might be a way to leverage that. If not, if you search for mobile analytics, you will get all sorts of companies that would love for you to use their analytics packages. Here are some examples right here. These are fairly well known. And notably, some of them can easily become Tableau data sources. So Google Analytics, obviously. The Amazon service, they use Redshift as their back end. So that's another factor to consider as you're thinking about analytics packages is how are you going to visualize that data once you've got the data. So Lee, customers always want their own custom icon and app name. How do they change that?
Yeah, that's, again, real easy to do. And so far we've just changed everything in the app itself. So we want to have, when you're looking at your device, you have a different icon, a different title. So let's just change that. And we've just got a new icons that were at a splash screen that we want to just drag into. There's a resources folder as part of the project. And we just called splash an icon. And if you're not familiar with a splash screen, that's what loads up when what you see when you're briefly loading things. And there's the Ionic framework provides a command line utility that will just look for those two files and will create versions of them appropriate for different devices. So we just do that, and now we can rebuild the app, and so it'll be redeployed. First thing I want to do is change the title here. So there's a config.xml file, and so this is what Cordova uses when it builds the app and what you'll actually see when you list your apps on the icon, or icons on the app. And so now we're just rebuilding it and redeploying it. First opens up on the device. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the new icon and the new title. So now we have a really fully branded app that we've customized, and on the device, we've got a nice customized view of it as well.
Excuse me. Lee, the source code here is up on Git. When you went and grabbed it, did you download the zip file, or did you use Git itself?
Yeah, I downloaded the zip file. As I say, I'm not usually a programmer, so I'm familiar with Git. I understand and appreciate the value of it, but I just don't use it on a regular basis, so I didn't feel a need to do that. So I just downloaded the zip file, extracted it, and I've got that folder structure that we were just looking at. So my idea of source code was really periodically backing up that folder and putting it on an external drive. Not ideal source code management, but that's what I did for my purposes.
Yeah, I started the same way. Over time, I migrated to using Git. It's pretty powerful, and I use it mainly with there's a free GUI client for Git. It's from Atlassian. They make great software. It's totally worth checking out. It's called SourceTree. And it has a pretty friendly visual interface to Git. One of the key elements with Git is that it lets you know what files you have changed or added or deleted. It makes it a lot easier to track, because I'll be changing a bunch of files and I can't remember what I changed or not. When Tableau updates its code, it's a lot easier to kind of merge. If you want to take those updates, it's easier to merge those changes in. So it's worth looking at if you wind up doing development.
Yeah, so speaking of development and deployment, since I've just now created my own app, right? And one thing that I ran into was deployment. Now on Android, it was real easy. I could just take my APK file and deploy it on Android, and for better or worse. But for Apple, they're a little bit more strict as to how you deploy things. So talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, you're right. Android, it's anything goes at any time. Apple is a little more locked down. So their main developer program is really set up for you're developing your app in-house, but when you publish it, you're going to publish it to the public app store. So their main developer program, they limit your distribution to 100 devices. And those are devices that are individually registered with Apple's developer site. I think you get to remove devices maybe once a year. It's really intended for developers working on your app. And the idea is you're going to publish that to the public app store. But Apple also has an enterprise distribution program. It's a few $100 a year. Apple does some extra vetting. But once you're in it, you can ship your app to as many users as you want within your organization. You can ship as many apps as you want, as many versions of your app without going through the App Store approval process to all of your org's users as much as you want. If you get into this and you want to distribute apps in-house, it is 100% worth looking at their enterprise distribution platform. If you have a mobile device management system, you can even distribute custom versions of your app to different groups of users. You can force deliver those apps down. So if you want to make sure everybody is on the same version of your custom app, you can stick it right down on their devices. The user didn't have to go update it themselves. It's worthwhile if you're distributing to a lot of different users. So to wrap up, what's next for the Bootstrap? There are kind of three main areas. There's increasing the breadth, so making it work with different languages and platforms. React Native and Swift are kind of next on the list for us. Increasing the depth, so showing more examples, demonstrating different techniques, so like analytics packages, GPS, offline snapshots. And as always, the documentation could be improved, showing some common debugging techniques, ways that folks like to customize, and trying to demystify what the app is doing. What role do you, audience, customers, play? You have a huge influence on our development priorities. A great example of this is the barcode scanner. That was a direct result of a conversation with a customer that led to an email exchange, that led to a Tableau dev project, and then code on GitHub. So please talk to us if the Bootstrap is meeting your needs. Talk to us if it isn't meeting your needs.
I don't know about you, I just want somebody to talk to, so I just get very lonely.
I'm so lonely. And I will say, talk can include email, GitHub pull requests, issue filings, that's fine too. There are a number of data dev resources. This presentation is up on, is available at that URL there. It's available right now. The code is up on GitHub, not just the Bootstrap code, but all of the Tableau developer offerings. There's a developer portal that includes a community forum. And somewhat frighteningly, there's a YouTube channel, but that's also worth taking a look at. Since this is the last session of the last day, these have all occurred in the past, but they might be worth checking out later on when you get back. There are a couple of sessions on embedding Tableau vizzes. The Retail Power Hour also includes an example of a custom mobile app made for a retail customer. That's also worth looking at. And for mobile-specific sessions, there's some really great ones. There's one on Device Designer, the mobile data workflows, and deploying Tableau Mobile within your enterprise. Those are also worth checking out, more mobile-specific. Sadly, this is the last time you'll see this slide at TC. Please do fill out the session feedback. We already have a viz in-house showing things. Tap the numbers, that's great. Even better is to type some words in the additional feedback area. Lee and I will end the session, the conference organizers absolutely look at that, helps us figure out if this is worth doing again next year, and if so, how should we change it? With that, we will take any questions that you might have, and otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Yes?
If you're deploying your company and you're behind a firewall or VPN gate, is there any support for building that in? Because I know Tableau Mobile, I currently have to fire my VPN application client and then connect it to our Tableau server. Is there a way to build an app to incorporate that?
Yeah, so the question was about your Tableau server is behind a corporate firewall. Is there a way to make it easier for a mobile user to get into that, to access that server? Sadly, a custom mobile app doesn't give you that much upside. You'll still, if you've got a VPN that requires user action, a custom app can't really get around that. And those have been the bane of our mobile team's existence. There are ways for a mobile device management system to make it so that VPN sign-on is seamless from a user perspective. But if it's one of those where you have to type in your info every time, a custom app sadly won't help you get around that. Can you embed that in the app? I was going to say no, but there might be some dark magic you could do. Follow up afterwards. We might have a solution for you. Okay. Yes?
Which version of Ionic are you using, or are you maintaining that? Or is it not this version?
Which version of Ionic are we using? Ionic recently upgraded. They broke us as of a few weeks ago. I think if you check GitHub as of right now, it should work okay. And we can do a better job of staying up to date, I will say that. Yes?
The two versions that you mentioned, the Cordova version and iOS native, in terms of UI interaction, are there any difference? Does it both support same gestures or other interactions as well?
Yeah, so the differences between the Cordova and the native Objective-C versions, are there differences between the user interactions? For very basic interactions, they're very similar. The big, as you want to get if you want to do something that's very complex, you might enjoy the native code more. If you're just starting out, you don't have any existing requirements, I think the Cordova version is easier to get started with. But you should be able to do just about any interaction the same with Cordova versus the native version. I personally prefer the native, but I work in that all day, so of course I think it's better. Yes?
Follow-up on that, is there any performance?
Oh yeah, is there a big performance difference between Cordova and native? They use the same core web view. If you go native, you can choose to use a more advanced web view that uses less memory, crashes less often. But you'll only really see that difference if you have a huge viz with a ton of marks on it. For most of the vizzes that you'd serve up on a mobile device, they tend to be smaller, fewer marks, and you wouldn't tend to see a difference. But if you go native, you can choose to use, it's called a WebKit web view, that does tend to perform a little better. Yes?
I'm not very familiar with the Cordova framework. All the examples that you've shown was about pulling information like dashboards and stuff. What our users usually also ask is to have some interaction that's the other way, like pushing to the right button or something like that. Is that available in the Cordova framework or not?
Yeah, so the question was, can we not just view information, but enter it also? Yes, and that's absolutely possible. You can do that with the Cordova version or the native version. And because you have control of it, you can say, all right, maybe at the top I want a data entry pane. You can absolutely do that with either version. Yeah.
Can it be interactive with those Tableau devices? So I choose a city, for example, on the map, and then put some comments about that city in the
can it be interactive too? I think it depends on your use case. I'm happy to talk afterwards about what specifically you might be interested in. The new extensions API when it ships, should also work just fine on mobile, and that might even help even more.
Well, and one thing too, it's because we're using the JavaScript API, it's bi-directional, so it can also, you can set events so that you can capture information that was selected on the viz. So if you selected a city, for example, on a map, then the JavaScript code could recognize that you selected that city, and then it's up to you, whatever you want to code, to write something out that would be in JavaScript or Objective-C, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yes? I'm sorry, could you say that again?
If I have my customer app and I integrate that customer app with Cordova, if I use just a ticket authentication, do you see an issue with that?
I don't think so. Let's talk afterward with your use case if you like, but it should work okay. This is very strange, looking out among the audience. Any other questions? All right, hey, thank you all very much.
Okay.